Preface to From Alien to Citizen, The Story of My Life in America by Edward Steiner, published in 1914. Preface. Some time ago, I met a distinguished visitor to this country, His Excellency the Minister of Public Instruction of Hungary, and had the pleasure of being his cicerone when he visited the schools and settlements of Chicago. Passing through the business section of that city, he saw its skyscrapers, erected without rhyme or reason, and his ears were assaulted by the thunderous noise of the elevated railroad. As his eyes involuntarily focused upon the headlines of a newspaper which someone was reading about a block ahead, he said something in his native language which, when mildly translated, means beastly vulgar. His polite reserve once broken, he let loose a tirade against the United States in general, and Chicago in particular. He asked me to compare the city of Budapest with its harmonious and distinctive architecture, its centers of civic beauty, its magnificent and ceaselessly busy riverbanks spanned by monumental bridges, with Chicago's congested mass of heterogeneous, inharmonious buildings, its muddy rivers, untidy, sooty shores, and its antiquated, dilapidated bridges. A polite silence is all one can allow oneself in the presence of one's foreign guest, especially if he happens to be His Excellency, the Minister of Public Instruction. We crossed the Chicago River and walked through miles of monotonous, dirty streets. We struggled through crowds of unpicturesque foreigners gathered from all parts of the earth, and the sights and sounds and smells which His Excellency had to endure were not calculated to change his first impression. After we had visited a number of the public schools, however, his attitude of mind seemed less antagonistic, although while listening to a debate on the initiative and the referendum in one of the graded schools, he declared that those children were being trained to be revolutionists. He further confided to me that in his country, such a school would be razed to the ground, and the teachers who encouraged such a discussion sent to prison. In the evening, we visited the settlements. He was greatly interested in the friendly, free service rendered to the unfortunate, and was fascinated by the bright and efficient women whom he met. In one settlement, he was attracted by a basketball game which was being played in the gymnasium. He marveled at the swiftness of the game, the perfect poses of the contestants, their sure aim, and the good-natured banter between the audience and the players. When it was all over, he forgot for a moment his offended good taste and astonished me greatly, but himself more, by involuntarily joining in the cheering. Then he said, "Of course, these young men are Native Americans." With perfect assurance, I replied, "There is not an American among them. The losing team is made up of Slavs from the Stockyards district, and the winners are Jews from the neighborhood of 12th and Halstead streets." He shook his head, doubting my statement, so to prove my assertion, I called one of the players and asked him his name. He gave it to me in its anglicized form, with a great many letters missing. "Where were you born?" I asked him. "In the old country, of course." "What country?" "Hungary." "Now, my boy," I said, "I want you to meet His Excellency, the Minister of Public Instruction of your own country." With perfect democratic dignity, the boy shook His Excellency's reluctant hand, saying heartily, "I am glad to meet you, Minister. How do you like Chicago?" It took His Excellency some minutes to recover from the shock. Then he said to me in tragic tones, "It is impossible. This boy belongs to the lowest of our subject races. We have ruled them for 900 years, but have not really conquered them. We have forced our language upon them, and they have refused to speak it. We have forbidden the use of their mother tongue in the higher schools, yet they never forget it, and with each year they become more and more Slavonic. You take our refuse, our lowest classes, and in a generation you make Americans of them. How do you do it?" "Ah, Your Excellency," I replied with a smile, "that is our art, and in it we are not quite so beastly vulgar." How do we do it? Perhaps the question would be better put by asking, how does it happen? Much of the process is planless, involuntary, even automatic, a natural result of this new world environment. I have been fortunate not only in watching the process and trying to analyze the forces at work, but in being myself a product of it. As such, this record of my life in America may be of value, for in part, at least, it answers His Excellency's question. My story differs from others in that I came here somewhat past the most formative period of life, that the changes which have taken place within me are most radical, and practically all the forces which are at work, both for good and evil, became operative in my case. The sweatshop, the mills and mines with their grinding labor, the lower courts, the jail, the open road with its dangers, the American home, and the Christian church. If mine were an unusual case, this record would not be worth the making. I am but a type, exceptional only as my individuality differs from that of others. I may have had more resistance towards some of these forces and been more easily influenced by others. On the whole, that which happened to me has happened, is happening to others, and while the results may not be as advantageous to many, the changes wrought have been quite as momentous. Wherever the newer immigrant has gone, I have been pleading that he may get that fair chance, that contact with the vital forces of our New World civilization, which proved so efficacious in my own case. I have spoken from thousands of platforms, and in nearly every place, some individual whose history was identical with my own has come to my attention, someone who, like myself, had felt the pangs of this new birth, and who, with me, gloried and joyed in the new life. I am bound to hundreds of such individuals who represent most of the non-Teutonic races and nationalities, and who, by virtue of the fact that we were born out of the same womb, with the same pangs and pains, have become brothers and sisters, united in a passionate love for our new mother country. I have been more fortunate than most of them in being able to tell the story of this new birth, a story which cannot be told too frequently. There are millions who have never been able to press through the throng and touch the hem of some healing garment, millions who are brutalized by hard labor and starved for want of that sympathy which fed and nourished and developed me. There are countless ones who live and die without knowing that America is not a stepmother who grudges us our wage and cares only for our brute strength. This making a record of one's life is not an easy or pleasant task. I have always shrunk from it, especially as it required the laying bare of my soul and the analysis of those forces which touched my religious life. This book was not written to increase prejudice, but rather to allay it. It is not a call to a new propaganda, but to a new spirit. If it stimulates that faith in humanity which is the finest inheritance of the American people, if my readers learn to see in the alien the potential fellow citizen and treat him as such, if in any degree I have answered His Excellency's question as to how we do it, more especially if this record teaches someone how not to do it, I shall rejoice in having written this book, even though the writing involved a great struggle and stress. Grinwell, Iowa, Ernest A. Steiner. End of preface.